Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our weekly Wednesday webinar at TAG. We provide assistance with evaluation of the Sage construction software products as well as implementation services, customization of reports, basically any kind of workflow design as well between your departments to make sure that technology is really working for you and that it's not creating more work. My name is Leilani Evans. I'm the Business Development Manager at TAG, and I've been with the company about 5 years assisting clients with all of the above. I am the Customer Account Manager for all our TAG clients, so if you do end up moving forward with our software system, I would be your dedicated account manager. Today, we are going to be focusing on managing compliance and why that might be relevant for today's landscape, and specifically that functionality in Sage Field Operations for Sage 300 CRE. Okay, so let me make sure that it is showing you the right screen. Okay, so what is Sage Field Operations as a whole? So in order to get into specifically compliance and forms building, I'll just kind of give you an overview of what this solution entails. This product is a web-based or cloud-based solution that talks directly back to your Sage 300 CRE system. And how does it do that? It has a connector that is installed on the same server location where your Sage 300 CRE system is. So as long as you have data or internet connected to that server, you'll be able to push information out to Sage Field Operations as well as collect data. Maybe if there are reports or photos, any kind of attachments or things that are completed out in the field are automatically in real time available to the back office within the Sage 300 CRE accounting system. So that database will read all of that information that's collected out in the field relevant to where it is supposed to go in 300 CRE. So this will help eliminate hand-to-hand paper transfer with today's conditions, really keeping people safe by eliminating that contact. Now, number one, it prevents from having to wait for you to get that actual paper, maybe time card or report from the field so that you could bill quicker, so that everything is managed in electronic or digital form. You never have to worry about if that single piece of paper goes missing, what's going to happen. So having that data backed up and in one centralized space virtually where everybody can have access to it is really a great benefit. So with this solution, you can conduct safety meetings, toolbox talks. You'll be able to have a log of all of that reporting available again in one central place. This is super important for labor compliance. So if you want to, maybe for OSHA purposes, track any kind of injuries or illnesses, maybe if you're taking temperatures out on the job site nowadays. This is all a lot of paperwork, a lot of reporting, a lot of data that needs to be tracked and managed. So electronically doing this in Sage Field Operations where you have a log, you can always go back to that date, that particular record. It's very helpful in comparison to doing it by paper. Now, this solution is very flexible in that it is a month-to-month subscription type licensing model, and where you can increase licenses and decrease. So right now, maybe if you're heavy on the service side and you are out there doing some very essential construction service work, this is something that you can increase licenses now and maybe pull back on later. It's something that's very easy to do and work with. So Let's talk about the difference between Sage Service Operations and Sage Field Operations. So Sage Service Operations is originally what this application was named. It was for service contractors in HVAC, electrical, et cetera, and allows for that field application to talk back to the service management module in Sage 300 CRE. So this helps get information from work order tickets, allows you to dispatch your technicians with a scheduler. You can actually see on a GPS time-stamped map where all of your labor force is, and it allows you to also do additional maybe inspection forms on equipment. It allows you to add quotes to the system, pulling from your parts database or your inventory, and then also allows for time review. So it collects all of that time on that work order, or just generally in terms of timekeeping, allows you to create an approval process for that time. Okay. Moving on to the next slide here. Come on. Okay. So Sage Field Operations is sort of a spin-off of Sage Service Operations. So this is more of your project management type of functionality in the application. It is the same application, but I thought it was important to mention because there's a lot of reporting that happens if it's your daily field reports or other miscellaneous reports that you are collecting out on the job. These are all items that you can manage within the Sage Field Operations functionality. So you're looking at a phone view as well as a tablet view, and you'll notice that they have different views of those items that it's managing. You'll be able to do your daily field reports, change orders, you'll be able to create purchase orders, RFPs, RFIs, and again, collect photos on the job site and bring those updates into the system automatically in real time. So let's talk a little bit about compliance and compliance, whether it be for time tracking or making sure for OSHA purposes that any kind of illness or high temperature is documented. Or maybe you have specific equipment that requires quite a bit of tracking on inspections and safety, all of that. That's all things that can be managed with the new Forms Builder solution or functionality within Sage Operations. This allows you to capture information, whether on a work order or a job, or maybe this is just a general form or report that you want your employees to do, no matter if they're in the back office or out in the field. This can enable a paperless workflow, and in today's conditions, this is absolutely crucial. It automatically attaches that form to the record in Sage Operations, but also allows you to have that information in the back office as well. This can be accessed from a mobile device, and you can require it to be filled out before an event. So maybe you need that particular inspection report to be completed before you can complete a work order. These are things or workflows that you can set up in the system. And you can also require that certain fields are completed, so you're never missing any bit of information that you need to have. This can also quickly be delivered, so as soon as this is submitted, it can either be readily available to the back office, or maybe you want this to be emailed automatically to the customer on file as soon as this form or report is completed. You can also set that up as well in the system. Okay, so before we begin to talk about the actual form building specifics, and what I'll do is play a little bit of a demonstration of how to build a form in the system so you can see how easy it is. First, you'll want to kind of design and think about the scope of the form. What kind of information are you wanting to collect? Is it going to be relevant to a quote or for a work order specifically for service, or is this a job-related form? Then you'll want to look at the various fields that you're capturing. And you can even add certain information within a placeholder if it's legalese or a negotiated term, or maybe if it's a letter or a notice. That's something that you can add to these forms as well. Then you want to think about who needs to be informed when this is completed. Does this need to be something that a supervisor needs to be notified of, or is this something that goes direct to the customer? These are things that you'll want to consider when you're setting up this form in the system. And then lastly, there are various form design views that we'll talk about. And when you're going to build this, the data collection is something that you'll be designing. So what input fields are you wanting to make available to your users? If it's the job information, the date, if you want to pull in all of the users or the technicians or maybe the crew members that are on the job site, all of these kind of input fields, as well as maybe questions, custom questions that you want to ask about certain equipment or whatnot. These are things that you'll want to think about in the data collection. And then the output of that report, once it's been completed, is also something that you can customize. So that's very important. If you're sending these completed reports out to the customer, you can drag and drop and customize the layout to give you various formats, not just one. You're not limited to just one single format. You can have various formats available from what's collected on various different PDF formats of that report. So maybe you have one that is created internally, and then you have that same input of information that is created in a more customer-facing format. So with that, I think what I'll do is I will go ahead and play a demonstration of this custom form building. Let me see here if this will play.
Now, I'm going to be creating a notice to proceed form today, and I'm going to be replicating a form that I currently have set up here on my desktop. And so first thing I want to do is show you guys that form and then talk about a strategy to going ahead and filling out that form. So we're going to come right back to the form builder, but we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence before we get started here today. And so what I'm pulling over here is a Word document for a notice to proceed with authorized work document that I'm going to be replicating in a digital fashion. Now, this strategy that I would recommend is that you're first going to want to identify all of the different pieces of this form here. And the way that I'm going to do that here today is I'm actually going to snap this over to the left-hand side here today, and then I'm going to pull up a sticky note that I can go ahead and, I would recommend you guys use pencil and paper, but I'm going to use this sticky note here today to kind of show how we can identify the different pieces of this form. And so the first thing that you'll notice is that this form does have a title. And so I'll go ahead and put in title, and we'll go ahead and put that, notice to proceed. The second section down is going to be the date field. And so we'll go ahead and write date. And then you'll notice that I also have an additional date here on the right-hand side called start date. So I'm going to go ahead and include that as a different field there. The next section down, I do want to capture the project name or the project number. And so I'm going to go ahead and put in job name. And then the next section down is capturing a contractor's name. Now, the next section down is a big section of text, which is going to be this whole body of text here. And whenever you're putting in a big body of text that you do not want to be changed, we're going to enter that as a placeholder. So we'll be coming back to that here shortly. And then you'll also notice that I want to capture the name of the individual here. I want to capture the title as well as the telephone number. And so you can see here that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different fields that we're looking to capture here on this notice to proceed document. And so now that I have these different fields identified, we can go ahead and start to enter them against the form. So we're going to come right back to that. First thing we're going to do is name the form. I went ahead and entered that as notice to proceed, and then you can go ahead and enter in a description that corresponds to that name. The next thing we need to do is determine what type of form is this going to be for. Now, general forms can be used throughout the program. Otherwise, you can make this unique to a work order, job, or a quote. Now, I'm going to tie this to a job here today, but if I were tying this to a work order, I want to just show some of the options that are available. Here you can identify the call type. Where do we want this form to show up? Do we want this to show up on all service call types, or perhaps just on electrical jobs, or perhaps just on preventative maintenance jobs? So we can basically determine when the form shows up there. We could have it show up for just a particular problem code, or we could select all. We could set this up if we're just corresponding to a particular type of equipment that's installed on a client site, or perhaps based on a certain type of agreement. You could also select the site here to say, if we're working on this particular client site, I want this form to be available. We can associate this particular form with a piece of equipment, and we can also determine different types of notification. So just wanted to highlight here the different fields that determine where this is going to be available. But we're going to use a simpler example today, so I'm going to select job. And I want this to be available on the job number 002, which is going to be for the Clackamas Office Park. The availability, you can make this internally available or customer viewable if you'd like, but we're just going to save that as internal only today. And then we'll go ahead and save that form. Now, once you save the form, you're going to unlock the ability to start entering details against it into the different views. We'll move on to the next section, which is that data collection view. And here's where we're capturing all of the different components that are available on this particular item. And so if you recall, I already wrote down all of the components of that form. So what we're going to do here is snap this to the left-hand side like I did before, and then we're going to go ahead and pull up the sticky notes on the right-hand side. There is going to be one additional field here that I want to capture, and that's going to be a signature. And so we have 10 fields available that we're going to be capturing here. And so this is the point in the process where we go ahead and build out that form. And so the first thing we're going to do is enter the title. And for the title, I found that anytime you're putting in a title, the section break actually works really well for that. So I'm going to pull in a section break here. And for the label, I'm going to go ahead and put in here, notice to proceed. The next section down is going to be date, and so we have to determine a component that we're going to use for date. Well, if I look down here, you'll actually see that we have a data entry component titled as date, and so I can pull that into my data entry or data collection view here, and I can go ahead and enter details about this date. And so for this particular date, I just want the label here to be today's date, and I want the default value to default to today. Then the format, you can format this many different ways. If perhaps you use day, month, year, but I'm going to use month, day, year because I'm in the United States, and that's typically how we write dates out. And you can, for any of these fields, you can provide guidelines. So, please enter today's date. I'm going to leave that blank today, but I am going to make it required for them to enter in today's date. The next section down will be the start date. I'm going to capture that with a date field as well. And under the label, we're going to title that start date. Now, this one I don't want to include a default, but I do want to make it required. And I'm going to keep that format consistent as month, day, year. Under guidelines, I could enter start date, but I feel it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm going to leave that blank. The next section down is the job name. We can capture that with a text box. Now, the nice thing about text box here is that we can tie them back to different fields within Sage. So for the label here, I'm going to put in job name, and not jab name, job name. So we'll go ahead and add that there. And for the default value, I want that to actually show up as a default as whatever job name that we're currently on. which is going to be the Clackamas Office Park, and then I'm going to make that required. However, you could also keep that as a lookup choice. So we could look up different job names corresponding to what's within Sage, or we could pick other details such as cost code information, job address information, miscellaneous items, inventory parts, work order numbers, and many, many other details, including a payroll employee. So now that we've captured the job name, we next want to capture the contractor's name. I'm going to do that with a text box as well, and then I'll enter in the appropriate label. Okay, so now we've entered the contractor's name there. We could enter in a default or allow them to look up, but I'm simply just going to have them enter in the contractor's name and make that required as well. The next section down is that text or the body of the form. And I said earlier that I recommend you use a placeholder for that. You can come here into the placeholder section, and I would highly recommend that you copy and paste the text into this right here. So what I'm going to do is pull up this sample notice to proceed document, and I'm going to grab all of this text here and hit Control-C to copy that. Come into the text here and hit Control-V. So I effectively pasted all of that information here into the text box appropriately. I'm going to label that as agreement here today. And then the position will basically identify where it gets positioned in the next step. So I'm going to have that position on the left side well, actually, this is for data entry. So it'll show up on the left-hand side when we do the data entry. And I'm going to not put any guidelines in for this one. But the placeholder essentially will not be editable. It'll basically be that text that we're agreeing to. Next section is the name, and so under the text box here, I'm going to go ahead and enter that down. And for the label here, I'm going to go ahead and put in name. But the way that I understand the program works, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little trick here and put in a very good construction co. for a very good construction company. And then you'll see how that kind of lays out in a moment. But then we will allow them to enter their name, and I'm going to make that required as well. The next section down is signature, and so I do want to be able to capture a signature, and you'll see under the components list that we do also have a section for signature. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that in appropriately and just label that as signature and make that required. And then we just have one more piece, which is going to be the telephone number, which I'm also going to capture in a text box. I'll go ahead and title that telephone number, and then go ahead and make that required as well. So now that I've entered those 10 fields here, I can go ahead and move on to the next step in the process. This is the most tedious step here, but you can notice how we have lots of different components that are available. And in the user guide that I've attached in the handout section, we go over what all these different components mean. So right from here, it may be a good idea to preview what this data collection view is going to look like for the end user. And when I click preview here, we can see all of the entry fields that are available that I've entered in, including the telephone number as well as the signature. So this is just going to the preview to preview this form. And you know what? Everything looks good here for me. So now that we've finished the data collection view and we've previewed that appropriately, we can now move on to the report view. Now, I wish somebody would have guided me through this. I kind of had to figure this out myself, but you'll see under the basic review here, basic report, that this one's starred off. What you're going to want to do is click this little gear icon and duplicate this. And for the report name here, I'm going to put in notice to proceed view. And I want to make sure to spell that right. And then go ahead and click Save. Now, then you'll come down here to the Notice Proceed view and make that your default view. And so we'll go ahead and do that. But since I duplicated that, I'm actually going to go ahead and clear this here. So we can do that by clearing all of these different items here. So I just clicked the X there and I removed every single row there accordingly. And so right now I have a blank report view. So what you're going to want to do is create the different layouts here and then drag the components into each of those layouts. You can see here that the 12 is going to correspond to one column. Kind of think of that as 12 inches or 12 units. And then if we split that up into 6, 6, those will be 2 equally sized units, but we can also split them up on unequal bounds as well, such as an 8, 4. And so for the first section that I had, and you'll notice that these components are in the same order that I entered them, I'm going to enter in the first one, which is that section break or the title. And for that, I can use the 12 here, which will correspond the entire section. And then I'm going to go ahead and drag that into the form view here. Notice how it went ahead and shaded that as blue, letting me know that I do have that in there. But you could easily duplicate that, and I could pull that in twice. So I'm sure you could think of a reason why you would want one entry to show up multiple times on a form. But the next section down, I want to look a little bit differently. I want today's date to show up in the upper left-hand corner, but I want the start date to show up in the upper right-hand corner. Well, one way to accomplish that is to use the 8-4 section break. And when I put that into the next section, I'm going to drag today's date on the left-hand side and the start date on the right-hand side. The next section down is the job name, which I want that to show up under the left-hand side as well. And I'm going to use the same form or the same break there. And I want the contractor's name to show up underneath that. The next section will be the agreement. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull in another 12 for that, as I want that all to show up in one section. And we're going to drag that placeholder into that section accordingly. We have 3 more sections here, the text box, the signature, and the telephone number, and I want those to be on kind of the left-hand side, if you will. So I'm going to pull another 8-4 in to accomplish that. And then we're going to enter all of those into the left-hand side, the title, the signature, and then the telephone number. So now I've effectively created a form view, and this is the last step in the process unless we'd like to incorporate some logic. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this document, and this should now be available on that job as I have published this successfully. But I do also want to highlight the next couple sections, such as logic. I mentioned earlier that we can incorporate if-then statements into these forms. And so, for example, if I wanted to apply the telephone field, I only want to show telephone if the signature has been completed. And so I'm going to say if the signature is not empty, then go ahead and show this field. And we'll go ahead and save that so that we can incorporate some conditional logic into our forms here today. The next section here under notifications, we'll talk about how we can notify different users. On the left-hand side here, we can set a title for that notification. We can create a template for that. Do we want this to email a default email address, or do we want to set a custom email? We can then create a subject for that and then build out the body of the email and decide whether or not to include an attachment. Here on the right-hand side, we can determine who we're going to be notifying. All members of a particular group, a particular email, or perhaps we could even use a text field on the form to email it to someone. So you can start to see how we can use the different components here to create a successful form within this tool. So now that we've incorporated some logic and whatnot, we're going to go ahead and save this form once again. And if we come under the Properties section, you'll see that I have this set up for job 002. So what I'm going to do is come under my jobs here, and if I come to job 002, then we're going to locate those jobs underneath the Reports section inside of the job level. You'll notice that, hey, it's not located here under the Forms section. What's going on? There's no notice to proceed here. You will also want to make sure that you publish your forms. So if we come back into the forms here, into the notice to proceed that I just created, look under the visibility here. Notice how it's currently disabled. You'll want to make sure to enable that. And that's going to basically be the trigger that lets that show up. So even though it's published, doesn't necessarily mean that the visibility is enacted. So you'll want to make sure to pay attention to that as well. So now that we've enacted the visibility, we can come back to that job 03002, and you'll notice here under the Reports section that we should have that available at this point in time. And let's see what's going on. Okay, we're going to go ahead and confirm that and save it. So now I had to save it. See, I had to change the enabled and then save. So I actually skipped a step there. So what you want to do is make sure your visibility is enabled and then save it. So now we can go to the job level and it should be there. See, under the report section, we now have that notice to proceed document. We can go ahead and fill that out. Notice how today's date filled in as 2/18. We can also enter in the start date and say we're going to start here next month on April 1st. I'm just putting in a date. And the job name pulls in automatically. We'll go ahead and enter in the contractor's name here today, and I'll go ahead and just put in my name. And then underneath here, we'll go ahead and put in the name of the contractor. We'll then enter in a signature here as applicable, and I'll just go ahead and just put some scribbles there. And then what you didn't notice is the telephone number wasn't there until after I entered in the signature. So notice if I clear the signature, it takes away that telephone section. But then we can go ahead and sign it once again, and then the telephone section shows up once we enter in a signature. So just highlighting the conditional formatting for that telephone field. I'll go ahead and enter a telephone number and click Submit. So this form now has been successfully submitted. Now keep in mind that because this is a web-based application, it's going to bring you right back to this page while it's kind of doing some processing in the background. So I could go fill out additional reports, and then after about 15, 20 seconds or so, I should have that attachment readily available here on the job level. And so here you can see a notice to proceed document that was created back in November. And so I'll quickly show you this one, and you can kind of see how we've laid out all of the different items here. But this one is for November, and I do want to show the one that we created here today, but it does just take a couple moments. And so we'll come back to here and then go ahead and click refresh. Under the attachment section, you'll now see that that number ticked up to 17, and we now have that one readily available that we entered in today, the February 18th at 9:30. So here's a image of what I created just a few moments ago. And so you have successfully seen me walk through all of the steps in replicating a document that I had been using in the past, replicating all of the different fields here, pulling them in appropriately, entering in the company name, the contractor name, signatures, and having all of those fields required. Once again, you can require that these forms be filled out before the completion of an event, such as closing a work order. Before you close the work order for this customer, you need to fill out this particular form that we've created for you. So just highlighting how easy it is to create these forms within the tool, showing where we can locate the forms, and what settings need to be tweaked in order to create and fill those out.
Okay, great. So that was a look at how the forms builder actually works when you're in the system creating these. Lastly, I just want to talk about how the licensing works. Again, I had mentioned that this was a very flexible type of licensing month to month, something that you could turn on, turn off, or increase or decrease the amount of users. It is named licensing, so anyone who is logging in will need to have their own credentials. So people can't be logging in multiple times. Everyone has their own audit trail, and this can be either turned on monthly or annually. Those are the two options for the subscriptions. And then again, as we're talking about the difference between Sage Service Operations and Sage Field Operations, those license types are going to be called either a Service Technician license or a superintendent license. So superintendent license is all you need to have in order to have these forms and compliance tools, and that is $24 a month. You will have to have at least one administrator, which is a $62 per month subscription, and if you only have one user, that one user can be that administrator user. Again, I'm Leilani Evans, construction software business development manager. I'm here to help you with questions, evaluation, or going to implement this at your company. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email if you have any questions, leilani.evans@teamtag.net. Thanks so much for joining, and I hope you have a great week.